She begged you to say it, but you didn't. And that's when she looked at you like a god, not when you kissed her, not when you promised her beauty, but when you stared through her, unmoved, untouched, and unimpressed. You didn't smile, you didn't soften, you didn't praise. You watched her like a riddle carved in flesh and left it unsolved. You wore silence like a sword, she wore perfume like a plea, and yet it was her knees that bent, not yours. You were not cruel, only absent from the game, and absence, to her, was unbearable. So she followed, not because you adored her, but because you didn't. This is not charm, this is not strategy. This is the violence of presence stripped of performance, and it cuts deeper than love. If this voice already breathes inside your spine, like the echo of a man you haven't met yet, let it rise. Like the video, leave your reflection in the comments, subscribe, and never flatter again. She is drawn not to reflection, but to resistance, a man who offers no illusion to cling to. She asks you what you think of her dress, and you blink not with judgment, but with a vacancy that terrifies her. You neither nod nor smile. The air becomes thick with her expectation, but you are not the answer she wants. You are the mirror that won't play along. You do not compliment her, not because you dislike her, but because something deeper than taste, something older than instinct commands your restraint. And in that restraint, she feels seen, not praised, seen, not as a goddess, but as a woman stripped of her spells, suddenly standing in the temple of a man who cannot be bewitched. You think your silence makes you invisible. It doesn't. It makes you unignorable, because every other man she's known was eager to reflect her back to herself. You're so beautiful, they chirped. You're amazing, they assured. And with every glittering word, they turned themselves into glass smooth, empty, shattering. But you don't reflect, you resist. And in that resistance, she feels something she doesn't understand, a hunger not for being loved, but for being defied. She leans in, you stay still. She performs, you observe. She tests, hoping for a crack in your composure, a flicker of thirst, a twitch of praise, anything to reassure her that she still controls the light. But nothing comes. You are not here to be won. You are here to exist. And that is what makes you dangerous. Because the man who flatters becomes predictable, but the man who withholds becomes myth. You are not cold, you are contained. And that containment haunts her more than rejection ever could. Rejection is an answer. Containment is a question with no end. She begins to doubt herself, and that doubt tastes like danger. That danger feels like you. You are the man who will not bend into the shape of her desire. And the shape you do take is harder, older, sharper than any fantasy. She may hate you for it, but she will not forget you. And in the quietest corners of her body, she will crave you, because every woman carries two instincts, the longing to be adored, and the deeper, darker need to be confronted, not with cruelty, but with the unbearable truth that she cannot always enchant, that she is not the sun, that some men will not orbit, and that those men are the ones she will follow into fire. You become the mirror that won't light up, the screen that doesn't respond, the silence that echoes back her own voice until she wants to scream, and somehow that scream feels like awakening. Because it is not love that pulls her, it is the absence of illusion, and you, with your stillness, become the only real thing in a room full of actors. She may call you heartless, but her eyes say otherwise. Her eyes ask why you don't look at her like the others do, why you don't melt, why you don't chase, why you don't offer the lines she's used to scripting for others. Her mouth says you're distant, but her body steps closer, Because in a world where every man is soft clay, you are stone, and stone is what she carves into. Every compliment is a leash, every pedestal a trap. But you give her nothing, and in that nothing she finds herself reaching, not for your affection, but for your recognition. The kind that cannot be bought with sweetness or performance, the kind that must be earned. And in that earning, she becomes more than she was. You awaken the part of her that wants to rise through fire, not flowers. You do not tell her she is beautiful, because you know beauty is not a gift. It is a question, and if you answer it too quickly, it dies. You let her wonder. You let her ask the mirror again and again why it won't respond. You let her look into you and find herself reflected not as a goddess, but as a woman unadorned. And somehow, that stings more deeply than insult, because insult can be dismissed, but indifference must be understood. And in her hunger to understand, she spirals. She dresses differently. She speaks softer or louder. She flicks her hair and adjusts her tone. She tries vulnerability. She tries fury. But nothing moves you, not because you are blind, but because you are awake. You see what she is doing, and you refuse to play. You are not here to mirror desire. You are here to hold your own shape no matter how much she twists. And that shape, that unmoved structure, is what she cannot resist. Because it offers no comfort, but it offers truth. And truth, to a woman used to winning with illusions, is a drug. She returns not because you flatter her, but because you withstand her. And in withstanding, you give her what no adoration ever could a boundary. And boundaries are not walls. They are altars. She may mock them, she may test them, but she will kneel to them eventually. Because what she craves is not attention. It is structure, not praise, but power. And you are power not because you dominate, but because you refuse to disappear into her expectations. She may not know this, but her body does. Her soul does. The archetype in her, the ancient animal memory of what a man is, it knows. It flinches when you won't follow. It tightens when you won't praise. It aches when you stand silent at the threshold, watching her with the same expression you gave the rain. Because you are not moved by her performance. You are moved only by what is real. And she feels, in that moment, that she has never been more naked, never more invisible, never more real. And for the first time, she stops performing. She looks at you without theater, and you look back, not cruel, not warm, but true. And in that truth, a door opens inside her she didn't know was locked. Not a door to love, but a door to selfhood, to the woman beneath the mask. And it terrifies her, because she realizes something ancient. You don't want her performance. You want the void behind it, and no man has ever asked for that before. She stumbles, her voice cracks, the illusion breaks. And still, you do not flatter, you do not catch. You simply remain the mirror that refuses to speak. The man who will not praise the illusion, the presence that demands essence. And now, in your silence, she feels the one thing she's been avoiding her entire life. Herself. When you remove adoration, she builds it herself. Worship needs absence, not presence. You never asked her to kneel, but she did. Not out of obedience, but out of something stranger, compulsion without command. You didn't gesture, you didn't bless, you didn't even watch her approach. And yet, somehow, she found herself beneath you. Not because you elevated yourself, but because you remained absent where others crowded. In your absence, she found her place. And in her place, she found worship not of you, but of the God she projected into your stillness. It begins when she realizes you do not crave her attention, that you are complete not as a performance, not as bait, but as a form, sharp-edged, self-contained, unnamed. You speak little, but your silence roars louder than flattery ever could. You do not demand adoration, and for that very reason, she gives it. Because the altar without a god becomes more sacred than the one overflowing with idols, and you, in your refusal to be her fantasy, become her revelation. She doesn't understand the shift. Not at first. She thinks you are arrogant, detached, maybe cruel, but cruelty has a motive. It hungers for reaction. You do not hunger, you lack, and lack, to the mind of desire, becomes divine. The less you need from her, the more she needs from you, not for validation, but for orientation. She no longer knows how to place herself in your eyes. She can't trace her worth through your words. So she builds her own myth, a mythology where you are king, prophet, judge. Not because you claimed the throne, but because you left it empty. Men who fill the air with praise become forgettable, but the man who leaves a void becomes a mirror she must decorate herself. She starts imagining what you must think. She crafts altars in her mind, filled with interpretations, projections, relics. She places your silence at the center, then builds meaning around it like firewood stacked around a cold stone. She lights herself, because the man who flatters gives, the man who withholds creates space, and space is sacred when no one dares to enter it. She begins to shape her entire self, not around your approval, but around your absence of it. She dresses not for you to comment, but to dare you to. She speaks not to impress you, but to test your silence. She reveals secrets not because you ask, but because your stillness makes her need to be known. You become the altar she kneels at to confess, not to be forgiven, but to be witnessed. You never ask her to perform, and yet she performs for you with more devotion than she gave to any man who begged for her time. Because you are not pleading, you are not watching, you are simply there, and in that there-ness, without agenda, without praise, you become the proof that something deeper must be earned, not extracted, not demanded, earned. She remembers how the others praised her early, often, desperately, and how quickly that praise became invisible, weightless, stale. But your lack of praise, it weighs like stone. It pulls her into gravity. It makes her wake up in the middle of the night wondering what you meant by nothing. And in that nothing, she finds the most terrifying and holy thing of all freedom. Freedom from being adored. Freedom from expectation. Freedom from the exhausting dance of beauty and applause. Because you do not chase, and therefore she does not have to run. You do not exalt, and therefore she does not have to float. You are the man who will not lift her above the ground, and so she lands. She lands in her body, in her mind, in her hunger, in her ache to be known without performance. And in that ache, something ancient stirs the desire to give herself, not as spectacle, but as offering. You never told her she was worthy, but now she must make herself worthy in your eyes, even if those eyes never shift, even if they remain cold, unreadable, disinterested. That disinterest becomes the altar fire, and she feeds it not to please you, but to feel real in its glow. Because adoration that is freely given means nothing, but adoration that is earned from a man who does not need it, that becomes religion. And you are not the preacher, you are the silence of the empty sanctuary. She enters barefoot, heart pounding, unsure whether you will speak, hoping you never do. Because your silence means she can keep building, keep longing, keep worshipping. And in worship, she is finally alive. She tells her friends you're distant. She tells herself you're a mistake. But her body walks toward you, Her spine curves toward your gravity. Her thoughts orbit your stillness. Because where other men gave her everything, you gave her nothing, and nothing, when it is pure, untouchable, unshaped, becomes sacred. She cannot shake you, because she never possessed you. You were not a man who offered to be kept. You were a shrine that refused to be entered, and so she returns. Not to claim, but to kneel again. Sometimes she screams, sometimes she leaves, sometimes she throws herself into the arms of men who flatter and adore and praise. But every praise sounds tinny now, every adoration feels forced, every compliment tastes like sugar poured on salt, and your silence, your vast, brutal non-response lingers in her bones like a ghost she never exorcised. She may say she hates you, but her hatred only proves your power, because you did not charm her. You deconstructed her. You dismantled the temple she had built for herself out of smiles and sighs and rehearsed femininity, and you gave her, in its place, the raw bricks of choice. She could rebuild herself for you, or she could walk away, and either way you would not speak, and that is what makes you holy, because the altar without a god forces the worshipper to create meaning. You never crowned yourself, but she forged a crown in your image, not because you demanded reverence, but because you denied it. And denial, when untouched by cruelty, becomes a sacred law. So she returns, in dreams, in memory, in every man who fails to carry your silence. She returns not for warmth, but for structure, not for flattery, but for fire, not for love, but for something stranger, a place to kneel, and finally become real. Only pain proves reality, and the unyielding man becomes more real than any sweet dream. You were not cruel, but you did not soften. You didn't move when she reached for you. You didn't glow when she offered her smile. You stood like a monolith in her blooming spring, indifferent to her fragrance, untouched by her warmth. And so, she mistook you for cold. But beneath that accusation was something darker, more unsettling. You were real. Every dream she had before you flattered her. Every man before you dissolved under her gaze. But you stood. You didn't bloom for her. You didn't wilt for her either. You stayed thorned, unmoved, alive in your own rhythm. And that aliveness, unfiltered by need, unseduced by beauty, became unbearable. She reached out with soft fingers, expecting the world to open, and instead, her hand came back, bleeding, pain. That was your gift. Not because you wanted to hurt her, but because your presence refused to lie. There are men who cradle her illusions, and there are men who cut them. You were the latter, and that cut sharp, clean. Unspoken was the first true sensation she'd felt in years. She will never say this. She will say you were distant, emotionless, cold, but her body tells a different story. Her dreams replay the silence between you like a wound she cannot lick closed, not because she loved you, but because next to you she felt herself, not as a goddess, not as a performer, but as a creature raw, incomplete, reaching. She did not love you, she needed you. Like a blade needs skin to define its edge. She tried to forget. She replaced you with soft men, men who offered comfort like roses, beautiful, scented, safe. But roses die, and the thorn remains. That is what you were, the thorn in the garden, the proof that paradise is not soft, that Eden was never meant to be painless. That truth, when it arrives cutting. You never raised your voice, you never claimed her, but you refused to collapse into her fantasy, and that refusal became her obsession, because dreams can be rewritten. But pain, pain, writes back. You didn't touch her the way she expected. You touched the nerve behind her ribcage, the one that trembles when she's about to betray herself. You did nothing but be yourself. But yourself was a weapon, not because it wounded, but because it revealed. You revealed her addiction to flattery, her dependency on praise, her endless hunger to be mirrored. And you stood not as a lover, not as a monster, but as a boundary. Boundaries are not romantic, but they are unforgettable. You never told her no. You never told her yes. You existed in the center of the maze, and she wandered for days, cutting herself on every unspoken edge. And in that labyrinth, she met herself, the self beyond seduction, beyond control, beyond charm. The woman she forgot was buried beneath all her performance. You did not dig her out. You ignored the performance until it collapsed. And when it did, she could finally feel her real skin. But that skin was raw, unused to light, unused to rejection, unused to the truth that not every man will worship, and that the ones who don't are the ones she returns to in the dark. You were not the man she planned for, but you were the man who happened to her, like a crack in the mirror, like a sudden stillness in a room full of music, like a bruise she presses again and again just to feel something true. There was a moment she will remember it for the rest of her life when you looked at her without reaction, not cruelly, not passively, just present. And in that gaze, she saw the garden around her disappear. The roses turned to ash, the sky turned to silence, and she stood there, not as a muse, not as a queen, but as a question, and you didn't answer. That is what made you real, because the man who answers too quickly becomes a fantasy, but the man who lets her ache becomes a god. You didn't promise her safety, you didn't promise her eternity, you promised her nothing, and that nothingness, like a thorn under her skin, keeps bleeding long after the garden has gone. You taught her something no soft man ever dared, that reality does not flatter, that truth is not beautiful, that the man who does not praise her sees her, and that is the most terrifying recognition of all. Because once a woman has been seen, truly seen, she can never return to her illusions. She can never laugh quite the same way, never dress with the same innocent vanity, never love another man without wondering, would he still want me if he never praised me? Would he still stay if I offered him nothing but truth? You are not a ghost, you are not a dream. You are the scar she hides under silk. She may marry another, she may smile in photographs, but inside her, beneath the layers of approval, the compliments, the polite hands of adoring men, there remains a bruise that still pulses your name. Not because you touched her, but because you refused to be touched. And that refusal made her feel more real than any love ever did. She hates it, she loves it, she denies it, but it grows. Like a thorn, it never blooms, it just remains, alive, sharp, unspoken, like you. She found the thorn again last night beneath her rib, where her heart used to rehearse its roles. It hadn't moved, it hadn't dulled, it hadn't died. She pressed against it. No blood came, only a silence so deep it rang. There was no garden anymore, no altar, no mirror, just a dark room and the echo of a man who never said her name. She whispered anyway, just to see if the silence would break. It didn't, but the echo did, and in the space that opened, there was nothing, and in the nothing, a breath, and in the breath, your shape, still, unyielding, untouched, waiting for no one. And so she came.